B.F. Skinner. Who is he? Well, I actually just talked to my boyfriend about this, who's in medical school. I said, Mikey, do you know who B.F. Skinner is? And his response was, yeah, isn't he a scientist? Well, I had to tell him that although you could say that he was a scientist because he experimented, he's more generally known as a psychologist. In fact, he is considered one of the giants of psychology and has clearly left his mark on how we know psychology today. So who is B.F. Skinner? Well, let me give you a little bit of background. First off, he was born on March 20th of 1904 in Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, which is a little bit south of New York. Growing up, he had one younger brother, and in lots of biographies, he states that he grew up in a very warm, affectionate, and stable household. His father was a up-and-coming young lawyer, and his mother was a housewife. As a child, he enjoyed building things. One thing that he built was a cart with a steering wheel that moved backwards, but that was actually by accident. He did not mean for that to happen. He also built model airplanes, other types of carts. He built a lot of things as a child. He also had an interest in animals and collected turtles, snakes, lizards, toads, and chipmunks. And we can kind of see that his interest in animals led him to work with animals as a PhD psychologist. In high school, he was really interested in English, and so he attended Hamilton College to become a writer. While at college, he often played practical jokes that disrupted the college community. He eventually graduated with an English degree, and that summer he attended a workshop with Robert Frost, who's a famous writer. Although he graduated with an English degree, his career as a writer was a disappointing one. This led to Skinner being depressed, and he even once considered seeking help from a psychiatrist. The book states that it didn't help that he had been rejected by half a dozen women. This led to an even greater depression. However, Skinner moved to New York, and while he was in New York, he worked at a bookstore, and he read some works by Watson and Pavlov, and that really caught his interest, so he decided to enroll at Harvard University as a psychology student in 1928. While he was there, he studied under William Crozier, which he felt that this man understood what he wanted to study and research while at Harvard, so he really took a liking to William Crozier. He received his PhD in 3 years and continued with his studies. He did postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Minnesota and Indiana University. In 1936, he got married to Von Blue. Together they had 2 children. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it was rumored that Skinner experimented with his children, but those rumors are false. Sadly, in 1989, Skinner was diagnosed with leukemia, and he passed away on August 18th, 1990. However, Skinner led a great life with many contributions to the field of psychology. So what exactly were his contributions? Well, as most people know, and what he is famously known for, Skinner coined the term operant conditioning. In fact, he developed operant conditioning and did multiple experiments with operant conditioning. So what is operant conditioning? Well, operant conditioning is a learning situation that involved behavior emitted by an organism rather than elicited by a detectable stimulus. So, in layman's terms, operant conditioning is when the organism, so let's say the rat, he will do some sort of action, so pressing a lever. And if that results in food, he'll continue to press the lever. So there was no preceding stimulus that led the rat to continue acting by pushing the lever. So some things that went with his operant conditioning. Obviously, the term Skinner box is widely known, and that was just like the apparatus that he used to test all the rats. Although he did not like the term Skinner box, he would have preferred that it was called an operant conditioning apparatus. So he did not like the term Skinner box. With operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner also developed the law of acquisition, and that states that the strength of an operant behavior increases when it is followed by the presentation of reinforcing stimuli. So, very self-explanatory. Skinner realized that his work, which involved rats being rewarded every single time they did a certain action, whether it be lever pressing or tapping up against a glass, whatever it may be, he realized that this really was not representative of real-world situations. So, for example, a person may study hard every single night for all of the tests, but they're not always going to get rewarded in the same way. They might not always get A's. So he decided to introduce and develop different reinforcement schedules. Now, I won't go into detail about these, but there are quite a few. For instance, there's fixed ratio. That's one of them. And these were a little bit more representative of real-life patterns of reinforcement. Skinner also developed the term successive approximation, which is shaping. And all this is when an organism is reinforced as its behavior comes in successive or consecutive stages to approximate the final behavior desired. Now, I said earlier, why is Skinner so important? A lot of the things that he developed, a lot of the terms that he developed through his experiments with operant conditioning can really be applied to real-life situations. For instance, obviously, with reinforcement, we are reinforced either positively or negatively in multiple different ways, more than once in a day. For instance, if you wear something new, if you wear something that you had just bought and you get a compliment from every single person that you come in contact with that day. Obviously, that's not that's not accurate of what would really happen, but we can just see how reinforcement schedules, different ones, can really accurately represent real-world situations of how we are reinforced. Also with shaping. Shaping is a tool that is used by a lot of psychologists in today's counseling therapy methods. For instance, if someone is trying to either develop a behavior, whether that's being healthier, or whether they're trying to get rid of a behavior like eating too much or to quit smoking, shaping is a widely used tool in therapy. It's very effective as well. So we can thank Skinner for all of that. He really has been extremely helpful for today's and current psychology as well as counseling therapies. So besides operant conditioning, Skinner did lead a very active life. He did some interesting things as well. For instance, during the World War II, Skinner developed this pigeon project in which he was working with pigeons to try and train them to guide bombs. However, Skinner, this Project Pigeon, eventually they didn't follow through with it. But Skinner found that pigeons behave a lot more rapidly than rats, so after his Project Pigeon, he refused to ever work with rats again. Skinner also developed the baby tender. This was in response to his wife wanting a crib for her child that would be safer than the generic crib. This was not a successful product. However, it shows that Skinner continued to build things in his later life, and this baby tender Skinner has been rumored to have experimented on his children, in the Skinner box, but he in fact did not do this, and he has said over and over again that he was an affectionate father to both of his children, and he never experimented on either of them, and that both of his children are completely fine psychological to this day. And lastly, in 1948, Skinner came out and wrote Walden 2, so he kind of went back to his desires to be a writer. And this book was centered around a fantasy rural community in which behavior is controlled by positive reinforcement. And it said that this was kind of Skinner's way of dealing with his midlife crisis, because he suffered from depression again when he was 41 years old. And so this book was not widely accepted, and he struggled to find a publisher to publish his book, but eventually he found a publisher who would publish this, but he had to also publish other works. Specifically, he published Science and Human Behavior to go along with this book. That was the deal with the publisher, that he had to do both. But eventually Walden 2 went on to sell 3 million copies. So why is Skinner important? I think I just showed you a lot of reasons, but most importantly because he developed operant conditioning, which is one of the greatest forces in psychology today. So I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to B.F. Skinner. Have a nice day.